freedom of speech,
fundamental rights,
freedom of conscience,
academic freedom,
freedom of press,
and the right to listen.
You're listening to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
Okay, welcome back to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, where every other week we take an uncensored look at the world of free expression through personal stories and candid conversations. I am your host, Nico Perrino, and at the moment, I am gearing up for a big move. I am moving from my beloved New York City back to my old stomping grounds in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Have no fear, I am not changing jobs, so this podcast isn't going anywhere. I'm just changing locations. But as a result of that, my life is in a bit of disarray at the moment. For example, right now, I am talking to you using my iPhone headphones on my iPhone's voice memo app. Also, as a result, we are not bringing you a standard, so to speak, conversation today. We are doing something a bit different, but I hope just as exciting, interesting, and stimulating. We are doing a simulcast. What is a simulcast, you might ask? It's when two podcasts get together to host an episode, and then each of those podcasts distribute that episode on their respective podcast platforms. And today we are doing that with Comedy Cellar, live from the table podcast. Comedy Cellar probably sounds familiar to most of our listeners because we hosted a debate at its live venue in Greenwich Village in New York City just back in May on the topic of, is there a campus free speech crisis? The Comedy Cellar is world famous. It's where comedians such as Jerry Seinfeld, Jon Stewart, Chris Rock go and perform and hang out at the back table. So we are good friends with Noam Dworman, who is the owner of the Comedy Cellar, and I was over at the club recently just chit-chatting, and he and I were talking about some of these outrage mobs that have generated, mostly on social media, in response to certain things that journalists, comedians, movie directors have said. For example, at the time when Noam and I were talking, there was a campaign online to try and get Sarah Jeong, a newly hired editorial board member at the New York Times, fired because of some of the things she had tweeted out previously that some found offensive. And Noam and I were talking, and he was telling me how, for example, comedy club owners aren't immune from this either. In fact, earlier in July, a comedy club owner in Long Island City, which is just across the East River from Manhattan, had faced a boycott campaign from a patron who was at the comedy club and overheard some of the things that her comedian said during a podcast. The patron found those things offensive and started tweeting about them, calling for people to boycott the club. They even engaged in sort of like an old school campaign by putting up flyers around the neighborhood saying that the creek in the cave doesn't represent Long Island City's values. So we decided that we would host a podcast conversation about not only what's happening at the creek in the cave, and we'd have the owner of that club, Rebecca Trent, on the podcast, but we'd also have a broader conversation about what these outrage mobs mean. For example, how should we think about them? They don't implicate the First Amendment because the government isn't involved. And one of the bargains that some say we've made in having a First Amendment is that private actors, such as private citizens, should be free to boycott whoever they want, should be free to publicly shame whoever they want, should be free even to call for the jobs of whoever they want. But what do we give up when in doing that? Should we do that in all cases? And what is the limits of speech that we're willing to accept before we're willing to go to the level of boycott or calling for people's jobs? How does this implicate candor, civil discourse, open discourse? And in the world of comedy, how should comedy club owners like Noam Dworman and Rebecca Trent, the owner of the Creek in the Cave, respond? Should they review all of their comedians' materials before they come on stage, lest their material might offend an audience member? Should they review what guests these comedians have on their podcast? Does that threaten artistic expression? These aren't new conversations. This is a conversation that we at FIRE had back in 2015 when we premiered a documentary that we participated in and supported called Can We Take a Joke?, which is about comedians and outrage mobs. The documentary featured Penn Jillette, comedian and magician, people like Adam Carolla, Lisa Lampanelli, Heather McDonald, Gilbert Gottfried. And it used the through line of comedian Lenny Bruce, who in New York City back in the middle part of the century had his shows broken up by cops who were offended by his jokes. In some cases, jokes about religion. And comedians that we interviewed in this were talking about how the new censors aren't government actors, they aren't the police, but in some cases they're the mob who heckle their shows and call for them to be fired from various jobs when they are offended by one of their jokes. The documentary is available for free if you're an Amazon Prime member on Amazon's platform, and also available for a small fee with most video on demand platforms. Today's podcast talks about those themes, as I said, and this is a bit of an abridged version of that podcast. We tried to keep it to around an hour. The podcast went a little bit longer, so if you want to listen to the full podcast, you can go over to Comedy Cellar Live from the Tables podcast feed on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts. We recorded the podcast on August 15th, Wednesday, August 15th, so it's coming to you a few days late. Before I turn it over to Noam Dworman, the host, I just wanted to remind you all that on September 4th, Fire President and CEO Greg Lukianoff and NYU professor Jonathan Haidt have their book coming out, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. We really hope that that book will land on the bestsellers list. In the publishing world, if a book lands on the bestsellers list, you get more articles written about it, more reviews, more radio interviews, more TV appearances, and that results in more book sales. That has this snowball effect, which for us, more book sales is a good thing because it means more people are confronting and engaging with the ideas and having the discussion about some of the things in the book that are very relevant to us. Like, for example, free speech on college campuses. So if you haven't pre-ordered the book yet, please do us a favor and give it a pre-order. A portion of all the proceeds go to support Fire. So there's an added benefit for you and for us. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Noam Dworman, the owner of the Comedy Cellar, my good friend, and he is going to introduce today's show.
Okay, you guys got your headphones working?
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Check.
Yeah, man. It's
man.
nice to like to come down fat in the reggae style.
Just don't block the
Oh,
camera.
Noam speaks patois.
Ever living a peace and love. Good evening. Welcome to the Comedy Cellar show here on Sirius XM Channel 99. We're here at the back table of the Comedy Cellar. My name is Noam Dworman. I'm the owner of the Comedy Cellar. We have a kind of special podcast today. We have Nico Perrino, who is, what's your exact title?
I'm the Director of Communications for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. And I
And,
also host a podcast.
He's also a he's been here at least twice before.
Right, but
on this podcast, yeah.
But he's a free speech advocate. FIRE, as the acronym is pronounced.
Yes, sir.
They are literally the group on the front lines fighting censorship now. To his far right, we have Monroe Martin, who's a regular comedian here at the Comedy Cellar, who does
what's
not
going on?
know the first thing about Bob Marley.
I didn't know you were going to start off like that. Jesus
just
Christ.
kills
I'm
me. And he said it's
insecure.
old. He said Bob Marley's old people music.
To me, I'm 32. It was introduced to me by old people. So I'm like, ugh.
Should we? I think we should specify that Monroe is African American, and therefore the fact that you're ignorant about reggae strikes Noam.
Reggae? Are you allowed to come at me when you just call it a reggae?
He called it
Said
reggae.
reggae.
Reggae. It's reggae.
Well, I once heard
And-
on an
can I
episode of the
finish?
Cosby Show, I once heard Bill Cosby say reggae.
Oh, that's cultural
Reggae.
appropriation.
That's
So I
who you
figured maybe
use?
that was more either more correct or not. I don't know.
And in the
Reggae.
middle, Rebecca Trent, who I adore, who owns it's the Creek in the Cave, right?
Yes.
The Creek in the Cave, a competitive comedy club in Long Island City, who
It's
is
artist positive or artist forward.
Artist
Yes.
Forward Comedy Club, who is
What does that even mean, artist forward?
I don't know that she.
Well, we had this discussion. It means that the artists are given. I'm not. That she thinks of their interests
more than her own.
more even than her own, or more even than the audience, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's more free flowing. It's like, hey, let's leave comedy up to an interpretation.
No,
So,
Noam
it's a safe haven. How about
let me
that?
finish introducing her. So Rebecca is someone who is, I'd say, universally admired in the comedian community, perhaps even more than the owners of the Comedy Cellar for her. Because I think that I am suspected of being a businessman,
A dirty capitalist
in certain ways, but she is known through and through as just
Artist forward.
vibrating with comedy, and which makes it so unfair that what's happened now is that because somebody, well, you tell the story. She's been targeted by an outrage mob, which is why I have Nico here and Rebecca here. So can you tell us what happened?
Why is Monroe here?
Yeah, for protection. I guess I don't know.
You're my muscle,
6'5"
honey.
black guy.
On the 10th of July, a fella who is not a comedian came to the Creek and sat down and had a beer with a fella who was here to see Legion of Skanks.
Now, tell us what Legion of Skanks is.
Legion of Skanks is Big J. Okerson, Louis J. Gomez, and Dave Smith. They are a trio that are they are the Skanks in the Legion of Skanks, and they bill themselves as the most offensive podcast in America, or maybe the world. I'm not sure how big it is. I don't know.
Is it popular?
It's pretty popular, yeah.
Yeah.
So on the 10th, we were having a podcast, live podcast. There's an audience there. And this guy grabbed the microphone from one of our podcast guests. I was in the office at the time. By the time I got out of the office, the guy was already on the other side of the bar screaming that Louis was a Nazi and screaming Sieg Heil and doing Nazi salutes to him. And Louis was responding by calling him every F-bomb and combination inside of that you can think of. And so there was a back and forth. I am, as I've said before, artist forward. This guy grabbed a microphone. He's not a comedian. He was asked to leave. I would have asked him to leave no matter who he was, no matter what the situation was. I always tell comedians when they go up on stage without permission that they are not invited back.
Now, I'm sorry to ask this, but it's 2018, and of course it seems to matter. What was the ethnic profile of this guy who was asked to leave?
I found out after the fact that he was probably Palestinian, but he worked for the Arab American Society of New York for at least a year.
He's considered to be a person of color.
He would be considered to be a person of color.
And he was complaining, and a Palestinian was complaining that Louis was a Nazi.
That Louis was a Nazi, who is, and Louis is factually a Puerto Rican person.
Yeah.
And he's not a Nazi.
And he's not a Nazi, and he was being held back by his two best friends who are Jewish, who are Jay Okerson and Dave Smith. So it was two Jews and a Puerto Rican that he was calling a Nazi.
I don't consider Jay Okerson. I know technically his mother is Jewish.
His bubby considers him Jewish. He's Jewish. I don't know what to tell you.
Nobody cares what you think he is. Go ahead.
But he does have tattoos, so I guess in some circles he doesn't count or whatever.
He's also got someone that he refers to as his baby mama.
That
Jews
is that true?
Jews baby mamas?
But he's married to her.
They're allowed, but typically they do not.
Oh, okay.
Well, all right. Well, I mean, I feel you guys should be allowed to have baby mamas. That's not fair.
We can have them, but we just usually do not have them, and we certainly generally don't use that phraseology.
Well, I think that's a choice. I think there's I don't know. Really, we're going to be mad at baby mama for all the stuff that Jay says? Give me a break.
Keep our eye on the ball.
Well, I'm certainly not.
Story, Dan.
I'm certainly not mad. I'm just questioning his Jewish bona fides. Go.
So we had a festival called Skankfest that happened that following weekend. The weekend after that, I was in Montreal, and while I was at Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, this person who I ejected from the Creek started putting up signs around the community, around the neighborhood in Long Island City, saying that I was a white supremacist and that I was harboring white supremacists and known Proud Boy supporters, and that I was involved with homophobia and misogyny and alt-right and all of this stuff. This guy put them up everywhere. I'm on the community board in my neighborhood. This guy put them up everywhere.
And it said something in there. They're also about allowing them to say the N-word. Didn't it say something like that?
Yes, I'm sure that was in there. And there's a.
Do they say the N-word on the podcast?
Yes.
Do they call people the N-word, or they just
no?
It's mainly Louis.
Jimmy Martinez.
You heard them do it.
Yeah,
Monroe's been on the show.
It's not like Jay and them with just dropping in bombs. It's Louis accessing his Puerto Rican side.
Yeah, you know, I have to say that Puerto Rico seemed to get a slight pass because my wife, I have heard her, not in a long time, but you know, because she grew up in Bushwick.
Yeah.
And she would, when she got mad back when I first met her, she would say that, blah, blah, you know.
Puerto Ricans, they use it a lot.
Yeah. Anyway.
And are they authorized to use it in your estimation?
I'm curious about this one.
I've always been confused. I've always been undecided because I don't understand how it came about and why it's appropriate, but because it's been most constant in my life, I'm so used to hearing it, I don't get angry.
Because it's an urban thing, and blacks and Puerto Ricans live
I think
in
for
urban
me,
I still, like, if I'm, like, in the hood and I see, like, a young Asian kid use it, I'm still like, wait, what?
No, I'm just saying that's how it came out. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying that's how it came about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a little bit more like pearl clutchy when it's an Asian guy for some reason.
Yeah,
I don't know
like,
why.
You're definitely not allowed.
Well,
to do
I
it.
think it's obvious why.
Well, no, I
They're
because I
not-
feel like
Well, Puerto Rican and African American, there's an association there.
But yeah,
With
so I get what
Asians,
you're
I think
saying.
it's a socioeconomic thing, maybe. I don't.
So a lot of Puerto
honestly,
Ricans are black
I'm not
or look black or
exactly
mixed with
sure.
black.
Many Puerto Ricans probably do have some African ancestors.
My wife has a certain percentage of West African. We did 23andMe. So go ahead.
You did that. So this guy papered the neighborhood and has been going around to like bars in the neighborhood bragging about doing it. And so I know exactly who it is and stuff like that and where he works and all that stuff. But I mean, I don't know. It's just the whole thing is just really gross. And he continues. Like even yesterday, was texting one of my bartenders trying to like go and talk to her because he's trying to actively boycott the creek and keep people from going to the creek. And his demand is that until the Legion of Skanks is gone, that he will continue to do this.
What is the Legion of Skanks saying that provokes him to say that they're Nazis?
He maintains that the Legion of I don't know. He can't. There's nothing that he could say that would back that up because they just aren't, and that makes no
Right, but
damn
what does
sense.
he think that they're saying?
I couldn't speak to that. I mean, like it's like when somebody says something that's insane that I don't know how to respond to. I'm not going to respond.
I know
to
Dave
it.
Smith.
Me too.
I know that he has on his podcast has had interviews and relatively collegial conversations with people that would be characterized as white nationalists at a minimum. People like, I think, who's that guy from the Charlottesville?
Jared Kessler, Richard
I don't
Spencer.
know.
One of those guys.
Jason Kessler.
Either maybe Jason Kessler, maybe Richard.
So
one,
he
one
had
of
a
those
white
guys.
nationalist on.
He,
Did he-
on his own podcast, he's had conversations with these types of people.
Well, what was the purpose of the conversation?
Just to see what they're all about and see what their
the
views
shit.
are.
Because I listened to you, Noam, on Race Wars, have a conversation with Milo. Would the same argument apply there that you can't have
Well, I'm
Milo
not
on
saying
your podcast?
that that's the reason this man thinks the Legion of Skanks are Nazis. I'm proposing a hypothesis.
Here's what I'm going to say.
I know that
this
Dave
is what I
Smith
think this
does
came from.
Talk to those guys.
Dave Smith is a sort of known libertarian, and politically, where he falls on the spectrum, I don't think that anybody could make an argument for him being either conservative or in any way
He's
a white
Jewish,
nationalist.
Dave Smith?
Yes.
Yes,
What kind of
Dave Smith
Jewish name
is
is
But
Smith?
certainly not. But anytime you're anything less than
the
hostile,
kind that escaped something. I'm guessing.
Is that it?
the very fact that you have a conversation that's relatively polite with a white nationalist would provoke some people, I think, to think that you were a Nazi. That
Really? Just to have a conversation with someone?
Geraldo Rivera used
if
to
I
do
go
it.
on Facebook and simply say anything other than Trump must be impeached, then I'm considered a Trump supporter. If I merely say that I think in this one instance, maybe what Trump said has a grain of truth to it, you're a Trump supporter.
I think that it is a wild leap for someone to have an interview and then suddenly their politics are realigned.
I'm not saying that this is why this individual thinks they're Nazis.
I don't think it is. I think the
throwing out
reason why
hypothesis.
he was saying all of this stuff was because he wanted to bring about a level of awareness to the Proud Boys and Gavin McInnes and stuff like that. He thinks that he's helping. He thinks that he's being a white knight and fixing a blight that's in the neighborhood because he thinks that it's a haven for Proud Boys. That's what he keeps saying over and over again. I believe that he thinks that because in the distant past, Gavin McInnes has been on the podcast. And also I think that he believes that because he was sitting down next to somebody who was wearing a hat that said Proud Boy on it, which he was asked to remove after all of the weirdness happened on the
Who are the
10th.
Proud Boys?
to my knowledge, and I haven't delved too deep, but they are basically alt-right. They are an alt-right group of fanboys from the Gavin McInnes camp, who is a radio personality, and I think maybe he had something to do with Vice back in the day.
Yeah, they call themselves alt-light. So
yeah, I don't even know what the fuck that means.
Yeah.
They seem like a bunch of tool bags, and I don't want to have anything to fuck to do with them. But I'm also not going to cancel Legion of Skanks because one guy showed up with a hat on. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, so as a comedy club owner, I'm very worried about this because
it goes further too, because now I'm being
ahead.
called into question for booking Anthony Cumia.
Have you ever booked him?
I have never booked him. He was on Skankfest. I found out the week before the festival started that he was on it, and it was a super uncomfortable situation, but we dealt with it, and nothing happened, and everything was fine. And
well, my question is it just this one guy, or is he having some effect? Are people not? Are you seeing a decline in your attendance?
So
What's going on?
There are some open micers that have now started calling into question, my booking and saying that, I'm being immoral and that I am not standing up for the community and that I'm putting the community in danger by allowing Cumia to be around. And
So Cumia hangs out there? Is that
No, he does not. I rarely see him.
But he comes here sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you rarely see him. Like we rarely see him. I felt and I'm not super comfortable having him at the Creek. I never have been. He's there very rarely. I flat out asked them to not have Gavin at the Creek anymore because of his association with people that I will not be fucking associated with. And at the end of the day, all of the sort of private back conversations that happened in the creation of that festival and whether or not and who was on what and who we were going to book ultimately wasn't up to one person. It was up to a team of people. When the two girls that were on that team found out that he was booked, we weren't thrilled, but we dealt with it. That's just what there is to it. And at the end of the day, nothing happened. And
okay, so it sounds to me like the main beef here is that Anthony Cumia was booked at the Creek, and you
booked
didn't
at the Skankfest at the festival.
And
he has been at the Creek in the past.
And you didn't. Completely disassociate
I didn't
yourself.
denounce him or say that he wasn't allowed to come into the doors. Now, part of the reason why I didn't denounce him was because the victim herself asked me not to do anything.
I just want to know
Vinny's daughter.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What do people expect you to do in that situation where if you cause a scene, you risk the business of your friends who use your venue to host their festival?
Well, and also we just don't unbook comedians in general. You deal with it if it happens. You know what I mean? Like, it happens sometimes.
It just seems like an untenable position to be in. Noam, you record a couple of podcasts here. You're not always hosting them. Are you and you host a lot of comedians. Are you supposed to know everything that they do or everything that they say? Are you supposed to police it? Are you responsible for it?
It's not just a podcast. It's stuff they say, stuff Kevin Brennan says on stage. But listen.
I mean,
let me tell you something. First of all, about Anthony Cumia, he tweeted that he was drunk in Times Square and he called that girl.
Yes, I know. It was horrifying.
I remember
He
that.
called that girl the N-word.
And that should have been enough then.
Who is Anthony? I'm not in the industry, so
he's a radio personality that started off with Opie and Anthony, which was a talk radio show from back in the day. And once they were let go from Infinity Broadcasting, they moved on to Sirius XM. And then after this incident, he was actually let go from that and now has his own compound. It's called the Cumia Compound.
Okay.
And they have a bunch of shows on there, one of which is his and Artie Lang's show. And we booked Artie, which was how we ended up
and Artie, who is absolutely not a racist. So this is interesting. So when Cumia did that, why are you laughing?
Because we live in a world where we have to be like, and this person is absolutely not a racist, and it just
I
sucks.
took that as sarcasm.
No.
I know he's not a
wasn't
racist.
sarcasm at all.
I know Artie. I just thought it was like a...
I meant like people say, why is he working with Anthony Cumia? Like they think they're birds of a feather. But so when the thing happened with Cumia, and a lot of people weren't honest about this, but there was one tweet which he says, I called her and he used like garbage characters like hashtag, but the two...
Arrow, ampersand.
Ampersand, but the two middle characters, it was six... It was six
You
letters.
saw the two G's?
Yeah,
We know it is.
and they used the same one twice in the middle, so it was clear.
A or
Very
the
well.
ER
No,
too?
it was ER.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, wow.
so this is what's interesting. So Keith Robinson, and I didn't realize it was going on.
Yeah.
Keith Robinson says, you know, all my friends, or people he thought were his friends, Keith Robinson is a black comic, are still going on Kumi's show or still hanging out with him. Like they have him on his show. It says none of them seem to care. And that went through me like a knife when Keith said that. And then and because first of all, it brought out to me the hypocrisy of everybody. Like all these people talk a good game, but here this guy, he's clearly, I mean, if anybody, he was clearly involved in racism. Yeah. And in an ugly way. And they're still like pretending it didn't happen. So then I got contacted by Kumi's Hill. They wanted to do a show in the underground. And I dodged it, and finally I sat down with Keith. You know, I said, listen, I can't do it. And until he apologizes or until this is resolved. And then I contacted Bill Burr because I know that his wife was involved. You know, so it is really, I just want to, just to be clear. So I'm the same with you. Like, that's the one guy. And by the way, Anthony Cumia, do you know him at all?
I don't know him, but I have
funny,
the same
he's likable,
he's Keith though.
Yeah, I mean he's really disarming. Yeah, like if you didn't know that he had that kind of thing, I mean you would say, oh, this is a great guy, you know. Yeah. But then so I'm almost finished. So then I got invited on Bill Schultz's show on the Compound. There's another show on the Compound. So they send me a guest subscription so I can watch it. So I watched a little bit of Kumia's show. Yeah. And I'm telling you, they were making fun of black people. And listen, I'm always the guy to say that's not racist. You can make fun. Yeah. It was disturbing. Wow. They're making fun of black women being like ignorant in the bank with their weaves, and like it was just bullying, and it really turned me off. So I called Sherrod. Yeah. I said, listen, I'm supposed to be on Bill's show tomorrow, which is a different show. I said, but I'm hearing this stuff on Kumia's show, and I don't think I should go perform in that, appear in that network. And Sherrod says, he calls me the N-word, it's okay, don't worry about it, he's cool, dude, blah, 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 blah. And it's like talking me into going on it. So you don't know. Yeah, you just don't know what you're supposed to do.
Move opportunity to opportunity. So some people can look past what's obvious, like, oh, yeah, I know he's a racist, but it's airtime. I got to sell my thing. But it's like, yeah, but you're selling your stuff to the people who think just like him. How many people? So it's not really valuable.
I'm okay with that, but then forgive it to other people when they do it.
How many people in life? How many people in life? It's very hard to turn your back on a friend. And in life, how many people have actually ended a friendship and publicly denounced somebody because, maybe they said the N-word or they said something offensive. I think if you're good friends with somebody, it is human nature to defend them, even when there's not defendable. And
but you should, because
should is one thing, but I think people defend their heroes and their friends.
It's people are too loyal to a fault where they're like, well, this doesn't represent me, when it does, though. Who you hang out with represents you.
I used to hear a lot of, like, back when I was in college, Farrakhan was talking about Judaism being a gutter religion, and said a lot of not so nice things about Jews. And I remember a lot of my black friends were defending him, saying, well, you got to understand, I don't know exactly how they were defending him, but they were defending him.
But that charity doesn't exist with Trump, for example. You see articles all the time, like, how do I deal with my racist uncle, with my racist aunt? I saw something on Twitter the other day. You know Bob Goodlatte? He's a congressman out of Virginia. His son's Bobby Goodlatte was one of the early employees at Facebook. And I saw a tweet going around. It had something like 40,000 likes. And he condemned his dad, and it's the first time I've ever seen him do it. He's like, what Bob Goodlatte, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, did with that Peter Strzok guy, the FBI Strzok guy. He's like, it's political grandstanding. I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, he is throwing his dad under the bus in the most public way possible. So, I mean, people are willing to give up their family relationships.
It doesn't have to be this whole showdown thing, but you outgrow people. If somebody's views and stuff don't match up with, or their behavior don't match up with yours, it's okay to distance yourself. You don't gotta continue to be their best friend.
I hear you, but I'm just saying, human nature being what it is, just trying to understand people. There are people that I really, really like, and there's a part of them, there's 10% of them that I don't like. Yeah. But I kind of like that 90%, and I just kind of forget about that 10%.
Well, look, I have musicians who worked for me, worked in my band, who were black Israelites. Yeah. And they hate Jews. And they hate white people. And they they were the white devil. I mean, like, and this is real hatred. This is,
Yeah.
But if they're not, if you can get them off that subject,
Yeah.
he's right. They're like, they're all right. They're cool dudes to hang out with.
Yeah.
And I find myself like, I'm like, that's okay. And the weird thing is that they divide it too. Like this guy who's is a bass player, and we're actually pretty good friends. Like, we don't ever talk about that.
Yeah.
But like I've been in situations where he was the guy who went to bat for me, and he was the guy who showed integrity. So, I don't know how far you can take that to say like there's anything redeeming about a real Nazi.
Yeah.
But if it's just a matter of attitudes that people have which are offensive, it is tough. Dan is right, because that's not all that they are. Wasn't it that movie where the racist cop was the one who saved the black woman in the car? What was that movie? One Academy Award.
Crash.
Yeah, that was a pretty effective scene. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
because
I
he was so
remember.
racist,
Yeah.
but then he was still ready to risk his life for the. So, is he a good guy or
But
a
I
bad
felt
guy?
like that was
Humans
his
are
job, though.
complicated.
You felt that was what?
I felt that was more of his like, well, that's your job is to put your life on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he did it.
I know,
Yeah.
so I can't really applaud somebody for doing their job.
Well,
I mean, yeah, it's his job.
Yeah, like I don't
That
want
movie
to.
was really weird for me because it was supposed to redeem him in the end, but he was just doing his damn job.
Yeah, like if he didn't do it, I'm like, oh fuck that, he broke all the rules.
It's like,
He's
I'm not going to
rebel,
applaud a
but-
cop who doesn't shoot somebody. Like, that's
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. It's your job to not be irresponsible with
you're
your
making a
firearm.
legitimate point, but and maybe that's just not the best example of it. But it is true. No, but it is true that
Yeah.
somebody can simultaneously have a bigoted attitude about
But-
black people, yet
But
at
what
the same
does
time
it do
help
with all
somebody
your
black.
other? If
Yeah.
everybody, if your
Or
other
Jews,
friends or the people you consider friends are like, yo, it makes me uncomfortable that you still support this dude, that you still yada yada yada.
I don't find it hard to cut somebody off. I'll cut somebody off.
In this situation, those
Yeah.
conversations have been had. They've been had since the festival happened, but
Yeah.
this conversation's been started online by other people who don't know about this other conversation. You know what I'm saying?
It's always like that.
And so
yeah.
now it's being blown up, and now it has to be something that's like, you know what I mean? Like, this could have been handled in a classy way, and there's no way for us to handle it in a classy way now.
So has
you know?
business been affected at all?
Yeah, it has been.
That's fucking
Of course it has
angering.
been. He put up shit everywhere saying that I was a Nazi and fucking support white supremacy. If you had a choice of going to any Mexican restaurant in Long Island City, wouldn't you pick the one that's not racist?
Yeah, but I'm a bad person to ask.
Maybe you are. Maybe you are.
What if,
What's that?
say if Gavin McGinnis wanted to show up and hang out and be,
I'd ask him to leave.
You would ask him.
I would, and I don't mean that in like a way to like square off with anyone. I'm not trying to fight anybody. It's not a fucking thing. And honestly, I don't know if I would recognize him. Somebody would have to tell me who he was. But I know I'm not a fan, and enough people have expressed to me that they are uncomfortable with him being around. So he's not coming around.
Well,
but
that's the
not
decision
even
the
really
Red
the
Hen
reason.
made a couple months ago when they
Well,
threw out
yes.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
And that's perfectly fine.
No, that wasn't fine.
Sure
That
it was.
terrible.
If they didn't want to, they didn't have to.
Well,
That's how it works. It's a business, you know.
But
if
they
they
did
don't
to
want to, they
her-
don't have to.
they did to her what
pulled
they're doing to you.
They pulled her aside quietly and said that they didn't want to serve her. They did not go after her job. They did not go after
they
her
would if they
livelihood.
could.
Well, sure, but they're protected.
No, I think it's just wrong.
No, let me ask you this question, because you were talking about Cumia. At what point is the outrage mob, whatever it is, justified in going after someone? At what point is it calling for? Because I'm assuming you wouldn't go after people calling for boycotts of certain white nationalists, like Richard Spencer. Not on speaking on college campuses. I know what you feel about that, but like, are there certain people for whom you would justify an outrage mob? You would say this is right.
Well, so just to answer you, first of all, as far as Anthony Cumia goes, but that's where I draw a line. I didn't want to do business with him, like having him appear in my club.
Yeah.
But I never said I'm going to start throwing him out, whatever. It's
Yeah.
like it's like at some point, I don't have.
You
to,
wouldn't go after his job.
or I'm just like, you know, he's racist. Being a racist is one of the many ways to be a bad person.
Yeah.
It may not even be the worst way to be a bad person. People beat their children, beat their wives, steal, rob. You know, in the scheme of things, saying some fucked up things, yeah, that's bad. But you know, there's and if I'm gonna, it's like somebody. So if I'm gonna start like picking this one thing, a lot of it is just pressure. And I add to that, and this to answer your question, I know that if it was about Jews, I wouldn't even do anything. Like it's in a
What do you
certain
mean? Why?
Like if I knew that Kumi had said like fucked up things about Jews,
Yeah.
I would have done the show with him.
Oh, wow.
I would have like, I don't give a shit.
Oh, I get it.
Because nobody could accuse you of being in league with him.
So in part of it, I feel the pressure to do it. And my attitude, my attitude about this kind of stuff is like, I kind of like hearing and speaking to these racists and I don't like to draw lines and whatever it is, and I just
believe in like like we all have to talk to each other. We all have to communicate and try to see each other's sides, different sides and points and stuff like that.
But there are some people who are saying you shouldn't. So I was telling Noam this earlier.
It gets imposed on me.
The Unite the Right rally in Washington, D.C., this Unite the Right 2, is on the anniversary of Charlottesville. An NPR host interviewed Jason Kessler, who was one of the organizers of the original Unite the Right rally. Yeah. And there were protests against NPR for even interviewing him. And a lot of these people who were counter-protesting said, if you interview us, you have to promise us that you will not interview a white nationalist. And if you do, then we are going to boycott you, or we're not going to speak with you. And there was this other reporter, Rukmini, and I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right, Kalamachi. She's an ISIS reporter for the New York Times. And she responded to one of these protesters or one of these NPR people and said, so do you not want to understand why they believe what they believe? She said, in interviewing ISIS terrorists, I've understood a lot more about the organization than I would if I didn't. And I just had this caricature of their motives in my mind. It's a lot easier to dismiss people if you don't understand why they do it. I mean, you can still disagree with them, but you come from an informed place that you wouldn't have not speaking.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. I'm fascinated by, I mean, I could surround myself by everybody who thinks exactly the same way as I do, and even if that's the right way to think, it's a little dull. There is some part of me which just enjoys the action, like the outrage of hearing people with like outrageous points of view.
I think the thing with Cumia is just his actions. If it was just like, oh yeah, here's his views, but he's not really about it and out in the streets calling women the N-word, then I think people will be more like, well, let me try to understand this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was terrible what he did.
But some of this is not all of this is like, and I don't know Cumia, but some of it is people online not trying to really understand what people mean, like the Justine Sacco thing from a couple of years ago.
What was that?
Just want to be entertained. They don't. That's how I look at it. When people are online and they show this fake outrage, it's just to have something on their feed so they seem busy and seem engaged, but most people are tweeting and putting their phone down and watching TV and doing other shit.
I think the best outcome for Cumia would have been, then you talking about this other one, is that his friends should have still gone on his show, and they should have called him out.
And they should have
called him out. And that's what I would have done.
Yeah, they should have, but it didn't happen. It didn't go down like that. It went to a defensive thing.
Yeah, they don't need to disown him, but they should go down and say, like, what the fuck dude, what is with you?
Reprimand him, yeah,
so
but it wasn't.
Explain yourself, huh? Why aren't you apologizing?
Yeah, something.
He never did. At the end of the day, is there a place in comedy for something that bills itself as the most offensive podcast in the world?
Well, this is the problem. I'm saying
is there a place for it? No, not as a venue, but like as a podcast, as a person who, as a person who's in comedy. Is there a place in comedy for the most offensive podcast in the world?
Well, they bill themselves as that, but are they that offensive?
I mean,
my guess
compared to what some of the other garbage that's out there, no, they don't offend me the most out of all the shit that I listen to.
They're probably really not that offensive.
Not really.
What is the most offensive thing they're saying on this?
I'm not repeating any of it.
It's more like abortions and like sex stuff.
It's sex stuff. They talk about like the last week they talked about how hot the Cash Me Outside girl was.
She a kid.
Well, that's why it's 15.
That's why it's offensive. Like, and that's what Jay's whole point was. Like, I have a daughter around this age. This is freaking me out. I don't like it. You know what I mean? It's not coming from a point of view of like.
I want to say I would not host a show where the racism was the subject matter of the show.
I don't think it is.
No,
I don't think that it.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying it's like it's distinguished. I would not like I say we're gonna like this is a pro-white. I wouldn't host that at the Underground.
Yeah.
But to just I would. Or an if it was like an anti-Semitic, I might, but I think that's different. But just the fact that the dude in the show had said something anti-Semitic, I would not feel the need to say this. He will never work in my place.
Yeah.
I would. Yeah. So go ahead.
But I don't know what to do. I have a venue that is open for everyone. It's open for all kinds of comedy. We teach little kids how to do stand-up on Saturdays. We teach Spanish on Wednesdays through stand-up. I mean, it's
what would I do? You know what I would do? I would.
What would you do?
I would call him into my podcast and say, "Let's talk about this on the radio." That's what I did with that Gary, with what's his name, Guy Branum.
Yeah, but
This
that's
guy
the thing
might
is
be
they
too
tried to get these
explosive.
guys on the podcast and they didn't show up. They showed up on the block and then were like, "Fuck you, we're not coming. I'm not coming in,"
Oh, you
and
tried
then
that.
left. Yeah, they
Some
tried that.
guests are just too explosive and unpredictable. I mean, Guy Branum, we knew he wasn't going to get violent. At least this guy sounds like potentially he could get crazy.
Well, where are your comedians?
I mean, I don't
why
know.
aren't they?
I don't know.
What do you mean?
Uniting behind you.
Well,
I mean, there's
some of them
security
have-
in
I mean,
numbers.
people have. There's a number that have, and then there's another number of people that support the other line of thinking. That I'm not going to get into a position where I'm censoring the comedians. I do not book the guests on the podcasts. I have asked from time to time that certain people not be booked, but I'm not particularly. I don't step in that way.
Again,
I never have.
Okay, but so your question is what should you do with regard to this the most offensive podcast in the world? Should it continue to be allowed to broadcast out of the creek and the cave?
That's not what I'm asking, because let me be clear. Legion of Skanks is staying at the Creek and the Cave. It's not going anywhere.
Bravo.
I am in no way inviting anyone from any distasteful group that I don't fuck with to come in and be an audience member. I'm not inviting I don't want any support from any of those groups either. I am just going to continue to do what I do. This is in its 6th year. Legion of Skanks has been doing this for 6 years at the Creek and the Cave.
So when you asked what
And
should I do, what will you say?
No, I wasn't asking what should
Or
I
is it
do. What I'm
rhetorical?
asking is there a place in comedy for the most offensive podcast in the world?
Yes, that Creek
Is
in the Cave.
Well, but what I'm saying, inside of the tapestry of
I get what
comedy,
you're saying
should
now.
it exist?
Yes, of course it
Yes,
should.
all genres of comedy should
But it
exist.
should exist in its present form, because you're describing a podcast that's really not that offensive.
Well, I actually
other
didn't
than-
really describe the podcast. It's just two Jews and a Puerto Rican talking about
Whoa,
pop
whoa.
culture.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound terribly offensive. I mean, you're saying they're
Well,
not.
you haven't met Lewis.
Well, I have met Lewis,
Well, let's
but
be-
they're not being racist over.
I don't think so, no.
Well,
No.
you don't think so, and I don't think so. But some people could take it that way.
And that's fine. But they are billed as the most offensive podcast in America. They're obviously not trying to.
Well, they're billed that way, but
appeal to people
They
who are.
They are not racist. I'll say that. I mean, I know.
They
I know,
are not.
I know Jay is not. Anyway, I know.
but
They
And
are
Louis
not.
is Puerto Rican, so he gets a pass. Right?
well, what you're saying is
Is that
there
how that works? I don't know.
is-
Why is everyone looking at me?
In order to answer the question, is there a place for this? I would have to know to answer that question precisely what it is that they're saying that's so offensive. Now, if you said, well, is there a place for white nationalist comedy at the Creek and the Cave, I would probably say no to that.
Yeah, that would probably be a no to me too.
But there's
But what if
somebody
We boo
who's
them
gonna
off the stage when they
support
show
it.
up at open mics.
Okay, if a white nationalist comedy, no. But what if you know that this really funny comedian? What if you find
a
out that
white
Ryan
nationalist.
Hamilton, whose act is totally
Oh my God.
turns
I
out
would be
at home
surprised.
I'd quit comedy.
At home, he's
I'd
got
quit.
a swastika on his wall.
I'd
Yeah.
quit.
And let's say you found that out
Oh my God.
because you were used to deliver pizzas, and you walked in and you saw you caught him.
Yeah, I don't
And you,
know.
so you know this
My mind
information,
would be blown.
and then you came to me and says, "You know what? There's a Ryan Hamilton.
First,
Should I
would
not book
assume-
him? I would book him.
I
Fuck
would
it,
assume that he just likes collecting like
No,
artifacts
no.
and shit. I'm like, no, he's just a
Nazi
fan of the
memorabilia.
art.
Obviously,
Yeah.
yeah, this is a wild, scenario.
Yeah.
But it's just a hypothetical situation. And I think it's
Oh,
an
let's say
interesting
it's Kevin
question.
Brennan.
Oh yeah, I expect
But the question about what to do is kind of, there's parallels with what's going on with Facebook and Alex Jones. I mean, they're hosting people on their platform within their salon or within their restaurant or within their club, in quotes.
Right.
And those people are saying things that they don't necessarily have control over and they don't necessarily sanction. And they're having a hard time policing everything that everyone says because you can't do prior review in every case,
Yeah.
especially when you're in the world of discourse or in the world of art. I mean, then you kind of lose the art if everything has to go through the review.
I felt like
beforehand.
that on. We were talking about this yesterday, and I was like, it's weird that social, like Facebook and Instagram and all that, are trying to censor him. Where I'm like, I know it's on the internet, and I see it all the time, and that's not the worst of it. Like, we watch people fight, beat each other up, use drugs. We watch shooting, and then we see this, and we're like, that's wrong. So that kind of seems hypocritical to me.
I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's like.
Yeah, and as soon as you accept that something's wrong, and now you let the outrage mob get what they want, it's going to be easier for them to go after the next thing. And maybe it's not as outrageous, but behavior
Yeah.
that gets rewarded gets repeated. And if you got rid of the Legion of Skanks, who knows what it'll be next. It probably won't be on the level with Legion of Skanks because they can start working down the ladder. At the next,
I feel like if they're going to take that off, they need to be super sensitive with everything else. They have to start blocking everything. Like when you upload music, they erase it immediately, and then you got to hit that you like own the content or something like that. So they're on top of their shit. So that means they're just going to have to be squeaky clean. If they get rid of that, they're going to have to get rid of sexual stuff with violence, stuff with bad language. They're going to have to
anything
drugs.
that
They're going to have to get
triggers.
rid of everything.
Yeah.
and
But
you have to
it's-
look at the intent behind it because a lot of times you see stuff getting taken down on Facebook or on Twitter that is satire, that's poking fun at the allegedly racist material.
It sounds like the main beef with Legion of Skanks, though, is not that they talk about the Cash Me Outside girl or they talk about sexuality. It's that they're perceived to be racist, or that
or that their fan base is perceived to be racist, I think is really
They
more
can't
precise.
help their fan base, though.
I've been told that I'm supposed to like find out who those people are before they're allowed in
No,
the like.
that's
I'm supposed to
stupid.
interview every person that walks in the room with a tattoo or with a certain look about them or however that's supposed to work.
They're
I don't know.
supplying entertainment. The people who receive it and pass it on to their friends, they have no control over that.
And the idea of Jay Oakerson being a hateful is so
It's insane.
It's
He's
so
the
absurd.
blackest Jew.
Absolutely
I know.
fucking
Like,
ludicrous.
dude,
Not me.
And it's offensive.
I'm teaching you
sorry.
about
You
reggae.
definitely are not, but you
Yeah.
did teach us about reggae today, so you
I would
get some
just,
points.
you
And
know,
you play a lot of string instruments, so I don't know.
I play the bass.
And what about
What's better than that?
and Luis Gomez. What has he said that would qualify as Nazi-like, expression?
Luis J. Gomez, to my knowledge, has never said anything with any iota of seriousness regarding Nazism, National Socialism, or in support of white nationalists or white supremacists in any capacity.
That
His
first
two
part
best friends
would've been
again are Jewish. And, it's Luis J. Gomez. We joke around that the J stands for genius. You know what I mean? Like, we're not... I adore him. He is a friend of mine, and I work with him, but...
Are you calling Lewis stupid?
But Lewis is but Lewis is not trying to launch a political platform. That's more Dave's thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not a political guy. And I'm not trying to call him stupid, but I am trying to say that, like, out of the three of them, he's the least likely to try and, like...
He's the least harmless.
Well, I mean, I don't know levels of harm. Like, all three of them are pretty benign at the end of the day.
The least person you expect. You're like, him?
Well, he's kind of like he's half comic, half street kid, and he's Puerto Rican, and he kind of just like runs his mouth a little too much, and he has to like. He's getting ready to like beat somebody up in Vegas next week or something. Like he's an MMA fighter.
Oh, I'm watching too.
He's a whole other kind of person. He's not like not. You know what I mean? I don't know what to say.
So now this is all
ridiculous.
happening at a time when there was the first anniversary of the
Charlottesville? Is that what you're talking about?
what do they call the right to
The Unite the
Unite
Right
the
rally?
Unite the Right rally?
Yeah.
And
so
now
sad.
I've been saying to people's anger for a year that I was not totally buying. You've heard me say I was not totally buying the fact that white supremacy is really been ginned up by Trump as much as everybody thinks it has been.
What do you mean
What's
by
your
ginned up?
basis for that?
Yeah.
What's that?
Like, why do you think it's?
Why do you think
He's
my-
saying trumped up, really. By the way,
Trump
I think.
up. My feeling was, for instance, when there were all these JCCs were being threatened with bomb
Community
scares.
Centers.
Yeah.
And all those the vandalism
I said
and stuff.
I thought it was a
Gimmick?
false flag that it was somebody.
So
was
liberals
doing-
are out there painting
Well, and
swastikas on.
Sure enough, it turned out to be.
Really?
It turned out to be an Israeli guy, and I noticed that this was my theory. The white people who hate black people, they already at full tilt hating black people. If Barack Obama, a black president, wasn't enough to get them out with swastikas on the walls, I don't know what would be. So I felt they were already in full scale provoked for 8 years under Obama. On the other hand, what did change when Trump became president was that it evoked a whole new hatred, which had been kind of complacent, which was the anti-Trump hatred. And these people, many of them, were looking for a way to discredit Trump. And we all know this is not the first time this has happened, even 1,000,000th time it's happened. Now, one way to do it is to pretend to be the guy, the false flag. So one way to make a guy look like a Nazi, or that is to actually put the swastika on there and blame it on somebody else.
Well, I mean, the guy
Which
went
is-
so far as to say that Jay has Nazi tattoos in the post that went up around the neighborhood.
So I've always taken this with a grain of salt. I'm sure some of it is real, of course, but I just know the temptation. People are human. When you hate somebody that much, you look for clever ways to express it.
To take
So
it as
you
far as you
sure
can.
enough,
Trump
sure enough,
adds
a year
any fuel to the fire and give confidence to these people who
so,
are.
so let's look. So sure enough, a year later, 20 people show up to the most publicized white nationalist riot demonstration
Yeah.
in history. 20 people. Now let me tell you this: if 2,000 people had shown up, this would have been proof positive. I would have had to accept that something's going on here. Trump must have touched something. There's 2,000 people here. Oh, is it only evidence if a lot of people show up? But if 20 people show up, we just pretend it didn't happen? I think when 20 people show up, people have to begin, you know what? It may not be quite what we thought it was.
Or it's just easier to do it online, and they found other avenues versus just meet up in a rally.
Maybe.
I saw those.
Racism is a lot more closeted, I think,
Yeah.
than people want to admit. Like,
but the
let's
fact
be
that
honest,
it's-
people lost their jobs
People
at
were
those rallies
freaking out
last
about-
year with this
but
face
if-
recognition stuff, right? They lost their jobs. So
When they had
people
a bunch
didn't show up this year.
There were like
But the
50
argument-
Nazis, 50 Nazis a year ago. I'm like, they're just a bunch of nutty people.
If
Good.
the argument is that Trump is giving them confidence, however, then the fact that they're still closeted does obviously destroy that argument.
But what
Not
about
really.
what about these comedians that are going on
Well, if the
stage
argument is that
and
because-
comedy club owners are telling them that they should not be telling anti-Trump jokes because the people that voted for Trump in the audience are walking out? What about and canceling their weeks for it and
That's
stuff
business.
like that?
That's business.
Well, yeah, but I mean, is it censorship?
Well,
You
you
shouldn't
have a
censor
right to
anybody.
censor.
It's censorship. Don't do those jokes because those jokes don't align with my politics. But you can go ahead. But you're booked for this
Well,
weekend.
look, as a club owner, you know, if somebody's walking the room for whatever reason, you have two choices. You can either ask them to change the way they're presenting themselves, or you just stop booking them.
Yeah.
I tend to just stop
Sure.
booking them. But the fact is, whether people are leaving because you're telling anti-Trump jokes or because you're not funny or you're telling anti-black jokes, whatever it is, you have to pay your rent.
The
Sure.
joke still needs to be funny. Like, regardless of how offensive it is, the basis has to be funny.
Oh, completely agree, but I'm not
Yeah.
talking about hack comics. I'm talking
No.
about comedians that you and I both respect that were
Yeah.
told that they couldn't finish weeks or were told that they couldn't do their sets.
Let's not have-
in places
Lassiter-
like Atlantic
yeah,
City.
yeah,
We're not
yeah,
talking
that's
about
right.
down south. We're
Lasser
not-
was on the show, so you could talk
Okay,
about it.
all right. So yeah, we're talking about John Lasseter. And I don't know exactly what the specifics were, but it also happened to Nate Craig. It's also happened to Mike Stanley. It's happened to more than. I mean, these are road dogs, but I mean, it's happened to.
I felt it
More than just one
different
person.
with that show, just because I did the show and they make you sign a contract. The contract you signed state that these are the things that is off topic. No political.
You see
no
those on
sex,
college campuses,
no
too.
Stuff.
Is that real?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very clear cut. Like, hey,
Jesus Christ.
we want the show to be PG-13. Here is the contract, X, Y, and Z.
And that's the Borgata, right?
Yes, and everybody, 3 of my friends have done it, and we've all got the same contract.
And by the way, I'll tell you this. You probably agree. There's two kinds of anti-Trump or anti-Obama jokes.
Yeah.
One kind, even the people who like Trump will laugh at.
Yeah.
Right.
The other kind, the punchline is basically, if you voted for him, you're a
You're an
fucking idiot.
Yeah.
And people are not going to laugh at that. And I never
You
like
shouldn't
jokes like that, even
insult
when I disagree
people.
with agree with the
Yeah.
politics.
Deal with it.
Talk
Yeah.
about him and his politics. Don't attack the audience, because they could be potentially your audience. They can go, oh, his views don't line up with mine, but he's fucking funny.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
You know? So don't attack your audience.
Well, as a comic, I mean, I guess I'm not a rebel, and I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to take a stand. If I see people walking out, I'll censor myself. Why the fuck
As
do
you
I want
should.
people walking out when I'm on stage? Now, I guess I could be like, fuck them, and I'm going to say what I have to say, and I suppose that's valid. I'm just not that kind of an act.
The word
you know?
censor is you know, has the connotation, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, of stopping something because you don't like the content, you disagree with it, you don't you think it's
Content, yeah.
that if I would take a comedian off not because I care whether they're telling Trump jokes or not or whatever it is, because they're not pleasing the audience, and I wouldn't consider I'm censoring them.
Sure.
I just say,
you're not funny. You're not doing your job.
Yeah, you're offending the audience. What do you want from me? You know.
Yeah. Well, with Lenny Bruce, at a certain point, he stopped being funny and people stopped booking him. And I mean, is that censorship? I wouldn't call that censorship.
No, he was just wildly confusing.
Yeah.
So getting back to the thing, I think I'm always on the lookout for these situations where if it had come out this way, they would have used it as evidence.
Sure.
But since it didn't come out that way, it doesn't matter now.
Yeah.
And so you're in a situation where you could it only works
We're back
one
to
way.
the rally.
That's so that's why I feel that I think that it's not nearly as bad as we've been led to believe it was. They were expecting a lot of people at this rally.
I know. I just don't feel white men are willing to lose their job and not provide for their family based off of how they feel about another race group.
Agreed.
And also, nobody showed up for his inauguration either. This is not a guy who's commanding big numbers in general when it comes to showing up for him, like in the mall. Make a face, but it's true.
No, but the point is, if Trump is being accused of making racism acceptable, the fact that 20 people showed up argues against that.
I saw the pictures of the security gauntlet that people had to go through to get there. They started in Virginia and at the Vienna Metro, and it was lined with police officers. And if you're a white nationalist and you want to attend this rally and you're starting in Virginia and getting on the train and you see a bunch of guys with machine guns, there's hundreds of them, and you got counter protesters, like,
you're going to lose your confidence.
You might say, I'm going to get back in my car.
It's so sad.
The guys with machine guns are there to protect them.
No, I agree.
God.
But no, that's the truth.
They were, but that's also frustrating because, if they want to show up and rally, how come my tax dollars have to go to massive police force for, what did you say, 20 people? This is where you're becoming part
of the
problem.
Part of the problem.
I wrote an op-ed about this for USA Today because the purpose of our government, the Bill of Rights, is to protect people's rights, and to the extent that costs a lot of money to do, you kind of got to spend that money because that's the baseline of what the government has to do and what it should do. And so when Richard Spencer went to Florida and spoke at a college campus and it cost $600,000, I'm like, I don't agree with Richard Spencer, but to the extent he has a right to be there, I think the government has to spend the money to protect his First Amendment rights.
And what he's saying used to be the liberal point of view.
The optics are very different. Ferguson versus the national rally, right?
Yeah.
The optics are very different. Those are also Ferguson. The cops weren't there protecting anybody's rights or calming anything down. It was fighting. It's very different.
Yes,
and I feel like the optics are very different. We're talking about protecting somebody going to a college campus. We're not even protecting people in the streets.
No, I agree.
Like, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
There's a double standard, and you got to protect you got to protect everyone's rights.
Exactly.
And what happened in Charlottesville, in my opinion, was a failure of the police. They did not do a good job.
Agreed, and they were completely unprepared.
Preventing violence. They were unprepared, and I think what happened at this latest Unite the Right rally was there was a ton of police, and it might have prevented some of these protesters from coming. Right after Charlottesville, there was another event in Boston, another right-wing rally, white nationalists. I have no idea what it was. Incredible police presence. They separated. They had about 100 yards in between the protesters and the counter-protesters, and I think that's going to an extreme that's a little too far in the direction of safety. The co-founder of our organization, Harvey Silverglate, wrote an op-ed about this. He's like, they created a desert and they called it peace. You got to find this happy medium where you're protecting the protesters' rights to speak and the counter-protesters' rights to confront the protesters, but do it in a way that's not infringing upon the protesters. Noam, what are you hearing from the people that attend the Comedy Cellar? Like, if they write back and they're critical of something, is it usually the politics of race and identity, or are they offended, or is it the kitchen sucks? What are they writing you about?
Kitchen sucks. No, we don't get that many complaints, but we do some get. We don't get many complaints about not having enough black acts. I guess we have a lot of black acts. We do get complaints.
That's because our audience is lily white.
We do get complaints about not having enough women sometimes. I guess because women are 50% of the thing. But we actually have more women than ever. And I usually just write back, listen, the only thing worse than the show you saw without a woman was the show you would have seen if I had put the woman who was available at that particular time, because I put the funniest people, like some weeks or some certain time slot. I didn't have a woman as funny as those other dudes.
And the other night, I guess the best people for the job available was a mostly black show.
Yeah, well, I think if we really booked fairly, probably all our shows would be all black.
Yeah.
Right?
But no complaints about content.
No, well, Sam Morril told that joke about the
the date rape joke?
The
kid who got eaten by the alligator or something, or the monkey.
Oh, I don't remember that one.
And,
I don't either.
The ape.
There was a kid in Florida.
Harambe joke.
No. There was a kid in Florida, like a 2-year-old
the
kid
baby at
that was eaten by an
Disneyland.
alligator, and Sam Morril made a joke about it, and a woman complained
Was it
via
funny?
email.
Yes, it was very funny.
Well, was it funny?
Yeah.
One might argue that 2 weeks after a child was eaten by an alligator, a parent might argue that there's no joke that would be funny to them.
But
on
there's
that
been
subject.
multiple kids eaten by alligators, so it's not like he can't even be talking about that specific.
Well, he was talking about a specific kid.
Oh.
Now, was it funny? It wasn't funny to this woman. It was funny.
But why isn't that not funny? But when we hear other humor, like you hear like crackheads being made fun of, or like gays being made fun of, and all that stuff. But then when we hear that stuff, it's like too soon.
Well, look.
Why is that? That's always confusing
Well,
to me.
it was one woman. I mean, the audience basically did think it was funny.
Yeah.
And one woman, for whatever reason,
Well, I
maybe she lost
will
a child.
say
Who
that,
knows,
that a child being eaten by an alligator in front of their parents is particularly horrifying.
If you make fun of that, not if you make fun of like the situation, not the baby, but if you're making fun of like if
Well,
you're
I
like
forgot-
kind of
I
like,
forgot the
what's
joke.
up, the parents?
Isn't this the sort
I
of thing that
forgot the joke.
Jesselnick does on Twitter all the time? He
Sure.
he waits
Yeah.
24 hours after a tragedy or just 24 minutes after a tragedy and then writes an offensive joke and people love it. He fills auditoriums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually don't like that kind of thing. But
What, like shock comedy?
Yeah.
Or-
no, like it was somebody dies, and they make fun of them. It doesn't bother me so much in the Comedy Cellar because I know that nobody from that person's family is there, whatever it is.
Right,
But when they
right.
take it public on Twitter or something like that, and you know that the family is going to see it, that does disturb me. I don't think that's the classiest thing
I
to
think
do.
what happens is some people don't acknowledge that, all right, this was a serious thing. Here's the funny in it, but this is something serious. I think they just try to get the joke and move out of it.
How long can you go until, like, how long do you have to wait until you can tell a joke about that?
Well, there's no rule. You just have to. It's the same thing about telling a Trump joke. If you want the audience to like it, you might think twice. And if you there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, I personally would probably have avoided a joke about a baby being eaten by an alligator. Sam Morril wanted to do it. That's his choice. My choice would have been otherwise.
But
and the audience will then decide whether they think it's funny.
But it's also about your likability and the relationship you create with that audience.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There are people who say foul shit, but because the audience loves them, they give them that permission. So if you didn't gain that permission, then you're always going to get that reaction.
Wasn't it Gilbert Gottfried who did the 9/11
Affleck.
joke during
No.
Trump's roast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Was it?
so.
So let's end with this. I think it's important for everybody in this business to really internalize that there are people out there, and they come in different shapes and sizes and forms, who would like to tell us what we can and cannot do or say based on whether they agree or disagree with the way we think.
Yeah.
And I believe we need to push back on this in every place it shows its ugly head.
But what if it cuts into your bottom line?
No, I was saying, well, we need to push back on it as best we can, philosophically push back on it, and not, as somebody here I thought was doing, pick and choose when to do that. It doesn't matter, I believe, it shouldn't matter that you're offended by somebody, you don't like what they think, whatever it is, because it is as they say, a slippery slope. There's no stopping it. And it's really not so bad to just hear somebody say something fucked up.
Yeah.
It's way better than the alternative of somebody deciding that's fucked up, this isn't fucked up, that's sort of fucked up, this can't be said, this guy has a good track record, so we're going to let him perform, this guy didn't have a good track, this guy apologized, so it's okay, his apology didn't seem sincere. It's an endless mess. Just let them say whatever they want. What's so hard?
And I think people need to come to each other's defense. Like you're here with Rebecca, you're coming to each other's defense. It reminds me of back when Salman Rushdie published the Muhammad cartoons, and booksellers were afraid to put the book out and all the booksellers and the publishers banded together.
Satanic Verses.
Yeah, the Satanic Verses, yeah. They all banded together to distribute the book together because there was strength in numbers. And they didn't want to be cowed by the censors because today it's Satanic Verses, tomorrow it's Huck Finn. You know, you can't give an inch because as soon as you give an inch, you give a foot, and then you give a yard, and then you give a mile.
Well, sometimes you give an inch and it just stays at an inch.
No. But I would take Huck Finn. I actually
that is not the saying, Daniel.
I am okay with taking Huck Finn out of the schools, though. I've said this.
I know. I heard you say that in the last podcast.
I am okay
Why?
with that.
What's the point of them?
Because they're
At this point, I'm like, you know what I mean?
because it's children.
It's like kind of like, what, at this point, why are you still change it up, or take it out completely?
I'll tell you why.
I'll
You tell me wrong. If I were a black parent, and I felt that my child would be upset by that subject matter, seeing the N-word written, whatever it is, before I thought they were ready for it. You know, I would say, there's so many other books we can teach them. Why do we have to ram that down anybody's throat? With adults, it's different. But I would respect parents' general wishes. Something that seems.
Why expose my kid to that early?
If the people in that school system felt that way about that particular book, I wouldn't feel like that.
Well, what would you say?
Me.
I mean, there are parents that try and get Harry Potter banned from their schools because it encourages witchcraft. I mean, again, as soon as you give into the argument, you open it up for other people to make it. I mean,
Joe Biden's niece is here.
Hi,
Joe
Biden's niece.
Come on. You want to talk on the mic?
Yeah.
So unite the right, for or against. Unite the right,
Unite
for
the
or
right,
against.
for or
Let the record show she said she's for it.
There are no true questions.
Is your uncle running for president?
If I happen not to know. I happen not to know. I love my
no
uncle. It has
idea.
the added benefit of being true. And I hope that he does run, but I don't know.
Are you a
And
Biden or are
if
you
I
on the other
knew-
side of the family?
If I knew, I'm a Biden.
Are you on the McGillicuddy side?
I'm not on the McGillicuddy side.
Okay.
But if I knew, I wouldn't tell you anyway, is also the truth.
Well, I hope he does run. I think he could win, and I think he's one of the last gasps of a moderate, reasonable Democratic Party. And you agree with that, right?
I sincerely appreciate that.
Yeah, and I hope.
Say it anyway, but it has the added benefit of being true.
Yeah,
He seems like a nice man.
Everybody says he's a nice man. Everybody says he's a nice man.
He is
He
a
spoke
nice
at my graduation when I was
He did?
at Penn.
From where?
University of Pennsylvania.
He's got a center
Cool.
at University of
My little
Pennsylvania.
brother-
now.
I'm also a Penn alumni.
Yeah.
You
Not one of them
Penn?
more successful ones. But
All right. He has a great sense of
Yeah,
She says he has a great sense of humor. Yeah,
so
and
that's something.
have you met Obama?
And Obama, yeah.
well, you look.
Him and
You're his
Obama.
niece.
I'm his niece. Can't you see my?
No, but you
the
look too
face?
young. You look too young to be his niece. I have a niece your age, and I think.
I'm 31. I just dress like a child.
Oh, okay.
All right. So we got to wrap it up.
All right. Well, that
maybe
was a good show, no?
I don't know. Were you happy, Nico? Because I didn't
I was
make
happy,
one.
yeah, we're
once a
simulcasting
month.
this,
Everybody
yeah.
got their
About mobs.
Everybody got their chance to talk, and I think we hit some interesting topics. And our special thanks to Caroline Biden for stopping in.
Can we do plugs? No? Can we do plugs?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I want to plug my podcast, So to Speak, the Free Speech Podcast. We talk about these sorts of things every other week. Good time.
The Bidens are also they're a Jew-loving family. I think they got several intermarriages.
As opposed to this Legion of Skanks.
Go ahead, Nico.
Oh, I'm done. I just wanted to plug the podcast since I plugged my company
Monroe.
earlier.
Monroe.
I have a show at the Fat Black Pussycat on the 23rd with Derek Gaines called No Need for Apologies. We double headline. It's going to be fun. And then we have a podcast called No Need for Apologies that comes out every Sunday.
Rebecca.
And go see live comedy, you guys. Go see it at the Cellar. Go see it at the Underground. Go see it at the Creek. I don't care where you see it. Just go see it.
I'll be at the Renaissance Theater in Mansfield, Ohio with Geechee Guy and somebody else. I'm a terrible self-promoter, really, but I'll be at the Renaissance Theater in Mansfield, Ohio on Saturday. Mansfield, I'm not sure where that is. I think it's an hour outside of Cleveland. But if you live there, you know where it is. The Renaissance Theater.
This Saturday? What is that, the
This
18th?
coming Saturday, the 18th, yes. And I'll be doing a private gig tomorrow in Las Vegas at the but it's a private gig, so it doesn't.
So you can't sell tickets.
Can't sell tickets. And
By the way, I want to take the podcast 5 days a week.
5 days a week.
Yeah.
It's a
but
daily,
I want to do
Well,
5 days a
that
week.
seems like a lot, and we'll have to discuss.
Okay. And on that note, good night, everybody.
All right, bye.
Bye.
That was a recording of my conversation at the world-famous back table of the Comedy Cellar in New York City on August 15th as part of its Live from the Table podcast. To learn more about this podcast, however, that is, so to speak, the Free Speech Podcast, you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/freespeechtalk or like us on Facebook at facebook.com/so-to-speak-podcast. As always, we like feedback, which you can email to us at so-to-speak@thefire.org. And when you hear from me next time, I will be a resident of Virginia, working out of Fire's DC office full-time. But until then, I thank you again for listening.